Hi, this is Eric, producer for Grief Hills. Before I introduce this episode, I want to remind you that we have show notes for each episode that include links to fun stuff that have to do with the episode that you're listening to, as well as questions for further reflection, which you may find to be helpful. Also, I'd like to ask you to share the podcast with your family and friends, enemies, neighbors, strangers. Share it on social media, like it on whatever platform you are using to access it, and follow us. That will help us out a lot, and we are greatly appreciative of that effort. In this episode, Lisa talks about how her worldview has changed through grief. Her worldview has been shaped most recently by a course that she's been taking on Black history, which has opened her eyes to the incredible resilience and adaptability of the African American community in the face of centuries of oppression and injustice. As Lisa's grappled with the weight of that history, she's come to see grief, or it has confirmed to her that grief is not something to be feared or avoided, but it's a profound expression of love. Through her own reflections, Lisa eloquently describes how grief can be patient, kind, celebratory, humble, honoring, releasing, truthful, protective, trusting, and persevering. All qualities that we all associate with the highest form of love. By reframing grief in this way, Lisa suggests that we can find a path to healing, forgiveness, and a new future, both individually and collectively. This is a powerful and thought-provoking exploration that challenges us to reconsider our own relationship with grief. Lisa's unique perspective offers a transformative lens through which we can approach the grieving process, ultimately finding comfort, connection, and the possibility of renewal. So if you want to see how this all pans out, keep listening.
Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals, the podcast where we explore how it is that grief heals us with our relationship with ourselves, with one another, and our whole wide world. I am your host, Lisa Michelle Zega, and I am excited to have another conversation. Wow. Hello. This is my third time recording while sitting on the floor in a room. And can I just tell you, I am actually not very comfortable. If you could see my setup, I'm telling you, I have like a microphone, tottering on this tin can. Like, have you ever seen those big 5-gallon cans that popcorn comes in? Well, this is probably a 2.5-gallon tin can that's holding up my microphone. My computer is situated on an upside down laundry basket. And I just don't have a good recording space here, but I've got great news, and next week it will be a whole different environment. So this is my first official week in Texas. Wow. And yesterday I received my office pod. I basically got an office container. It's like a metal container. It's not the exact same ones that are like, container buildings that are converted containers from, like train cars or transport things. And it is a metal building. It's 10 by 20. It's beautiful by my standards. I absolutely love it. My husband just arranged all this stuff for me while I was traveling. He actually built the foundation for it. And yeah, it should be up and running and operable, is that the right word? By next week. And then I'll be actually coming to a brand new space that's just going to feel so yummy and so good. and I'm very, very excited. And in the meantime, I'm in another empty room. Well, it's not completely empty, but it's fairly empty. And just getting to, what do you call it? I be flexible. That's not the word that I was looking for, but I'm really getting opportunities to just roll and move with the flow of life. So if you've been with me, around me, talked to me, um, one of the things you will know is that the way I see grief is that grief is love. And so today, what do you think about just talking about that? Like, how is it that grief is love? I feel like there's other things that I want to share, but let's just go ahead and jump right in. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining this conversation. Thank you for helping to change like the conversation that we're having as a culture, as individuals around grief. And so let me just tell you what prompted today's conversation. I am taking a course, and I may have mentioned it before, and maybe I didn't, but I'm taking a course called Black History for a New Day. And I'm taking the course through an organization called Nehemiah. They have a branch of their organization called Justified Anger. And this course is blowing my ever loving mind. Like, I am so incredibly grateful for this material. And this week I was in the third lecture and talking about slavery, right? And how Black African Americans were oppressed by slavery and and not destroyed by it. Oppressed and not destroyed. And as the professor went over like just different things throughout history and talking about this, I found myself incredibly humbled by the strength, the resilience, the perseverance, the innovation, like basically how, families were literally torn apart, separated by slavery, right? Like being sold. Can you imagine? I mean, it's hard to imagine having my child, my husband taken from me, sold to work somewhere else where I would likely never, ever, ever see them again. And the response, like not minimizing the suffering that this caused, and at the same time being flexible and adaptive. And what do I mean by that? Like by literally bringing in, taking on the family that was left there, so that the family structure became incredibly flexible and adaptive. And that culture has carried on. Like, and I know I'm not Black, and yet I was also raised with family members that were not technically family members, like Uncle Jesse, who was not blood relation and yet became a form of my family. And that, like, in many ways, that whole concept being rooted in the instability caused by things like slavery right? And how we as people are adaptive and flexible, and really honoring that in African American communities, honoring the commitment to religion, to music, to like creating yummy food based on the scraps, right? The resistance of people. And how does that relate to today's episode of Grief Heals, right? And me wanting to talk about how grief is actually love. Well, okay, as I'm taking this course and it's stirring up all kinds of anger and all kinds of feels. But this particular lecture this week, I stood in awe and wonder and amazement at the fortitude of people who were experiencing for centuries such injustice. And have you ever watched a movie and you're seeing all the setbacks of the main character, and because you're witnessing the setbacks, like you are like championing and exalting and rejoicing, and yes, when you see the character in the movie triumphing in some kind of way, and maybe a triumph that doesn't seem as grand if you don't know what it is they are facing. So that's something of my experience in this course, and watching systematic oppression in the transatlantic slave trade, the oppression written in to the Constitution of the United States, enforced legally, right, for generations. And in this context, looking at the innovation, the beauty, the strength, the fortitude of African Americans. And as I was looking at that this week, I've just been grappling with the grief there. And so I did a thing. I actually took the passage in the Bible from 1 Corinthians that speaks about love. And I don't know why. I'm like, I can't even imagine this being the way it was in the original language, but so much of this love chapter is written in the negative. So the first thing I did is I wrote it in the positive, right? So let me just read that to you. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love celebrates others. Love is humble. Love honors. Love uplifts. Love gives. Love is peace. Love is calm. Love is forgiving. Love releases. Love frees. Love rejoices in the truth. Love protects. Love trusts. Love perseveres. Love never fails. In fact, love always wins. So, how could it be that grief is in fact love. And I'm thinking about, like, how is it that grief is patient? Because so much of our grief goes unwitnessed, like ignored, unacknowledged, buried, and covered. And so thinking about, like, one of the things that this course reveals is how much of the grief suffered by African Americans coming from all over the continent of Africa, in all these different countries held within Africa, and how much of that grief has been unwitnessed and ignored. So think about this. How patient must grief be? To wait, to hold, to be with, just waiting for the time that grief would be acknowledged, that love would come in to the places that grief is holding. Grief is patient. Grief will wait. Grief will wait for centuries to be witnessed, to be held. How is it that grief is kind? Right? Like, grief doesn't come in to add suffering upon suffering. Grief comes in to alleviate suffering, to be with suffering, to bring kindness and tender mercy to the places of pain. Grief literally celebrates others, ourselves, our ancestors. Grief comes in and recognizes what we've experienced and celebrates the fortitude, celebrates the goodness, highlights what there is here that is nourishing, what there is there to feed our very existence, right? Like, grief genuinely celebrates who we are and where we've been. Grief is humble. Like, grief comes in to be with, to sit with, to sit in humility, not advising, fixing, saving, really to be incarnate with, to come and take on what it is we've taken on in humility, like to sit in ashes with us when all that we have has been burned to rubble. Whew, will you take a breath with me? We breathe the same air and we are connected. Grief literally honors and uplifts us as individuals, each other, like our communities. The more I'm looking at this and just thinking about this and considering this and asking, how is grief love? And thinking about this through the lens of Black history for a new day. Like, literally to come in, I'm just imagining what it is to come, how love brings new life, that literally grief engaged, grief held on purpose is here for new, so that grief literally releases. It releases. Grief says, I will not carry your pain in my body. And then mysteriously, grief actually says, well, I will carry your pain. Like, it's like, I will carry the pain of the collective. I will bring love here. But there's this other way in which, and I'm like, Lisa, are you talking in circles? And maybe I am. On the one hand, there's this forgiveness, this releasing, this unwillingness to carry the processed pain of other people in our own bodies, right? And so grief releases that, so that we, you and I, are literally letting go of what is not ours to carry. The wounds of the oppressors, right, that are unprocessed, so that their pain is visited on the pain of others. Like, grief says, no, 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 no. Let's release. Let's forgive. Let's let go of this, so that we ourselves are not perpetuating unprocessed pain. So that we rejoice in what is good, what is true. Like, that is what grief is looking at. Grief actually is very honest. It's not denying, it's looking in the depths of our pain, both as individuals and as communities, ancestry, like historically, and rejoicing in taking these honest looks. Grief is protective. Grief literally guards us, shrouds us, holds us like in a blanket of warmth, and says, yes, 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 I will bring love here to this place. And grief is so incredibly honest, because grief trusts. And without honesty, can there really be trust? And grief hopes. Grief like longs and looks for something new. It is not, what am I trying to say? Bound by the past, so that the structures that constrain us and have constrained us need not be permanently constraining. Like, grief literally is a path of freedom. So I guess there's this way in which I'm making a case that grief really is love, that it perseveres, that it always wins. I don't need this to be true. But what I will say is, it's true for me. It's the way that I understand coming together to mourn what has been and what is, for a new future, for a new day. I really find great comfort in entering grief, that I might rejoice in, the opportunity for a new beginning, whether that's as an individual, as a community, as a world. So if we could just take a breath together. And I just invite you to consider how grief might be love. And if you heard yelling in the background, my sweet hubby made me breakfast, or a knock at the door because he didn't think I heard him yelling, so he came to tell me. And with that, I'm going to open my arms, invite you in for a hug. Until next time, may you consider how it could be, how just maybe grief might be love. Mwah.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Kendalian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.